Welcome to my top 10 rock guitar solos from the 70s. I will demonstrate each solo and then break down some of the techniques used to play them and then give you tips on how to practice them efficiently. Let's dive in. Highway to Hell solo by AC/DC. The solo is played by Angus Young and it's released in the Highway to Hell album in 1979. The tuning is somewhere between standard tuning and a half step down. It's around -60 of a semitone, but I'm gonna play it in standard tuning. Practice tip. This is one of those solos that you could say the tone is in the fingers. Pay attention to the details hidden in the bends, palm mutes and dead notes, because this is what makes this solo so dynamic. Without these nuances, the solos would sound flat and you wouldn't be able to pinpoint the reason. Let's talk about these interesting spots one by one. First off, we have the double bend on the 7th fret of the G and B string. If you notice the profile of this bend, there is a quick quarter note bend which releases, and then there is another bend which is more gradual. So it goes like this. You can choose which fingers you want to use for this bend. My personal preference is the ring and the pinky finger. Some would say that it's more comfortable for them to use only the ring finger, like so. It's a matter of personal preference. I feel like I have more control when I use both fingers, so it's up to you. Next comes a phrase that includes a series of palm mutes and bends. So this phrase includes 2 palm muted notes followed by a slight bend on the 5th fret of the G string, and then followed by a pre-bend on the 4th fret of the D string, and then a pull-off, a bend on the 3rd of the A string and a pull-off to the A string. So all together it goes like this. Just to prove my point that these little nuances play a huge role in how the solo sounds, I'm just going to play the solo without the palm mute notes and without the bend on the 5th and without the pre-bend on the 4th of the D string. Compared to this. On the next phrase, you need to bend the 4th fret of the G string and keep it bent until you return to the same note to release it. So here is the whole solo in slow speed. Moving on at number 9, we've got the solo for Burn by Deep Purple, released in 1974 in their album Burn. The solo is played by Ritchie Blackmore in standard tuning. Practice tip. This solo uses 2 picking patterns, so let's take it one by one. The first one is a widely used pattern you will find in many solos of the era, and it consists of the 3 notes of the triad of the chord. These are played with a downstroke pull-off, followed by an upstroke on the string above. In this solo, you will see this pattern with two different variations. So let's check them out one by one. Variation 1. So it's a pull off on the E string and an upstroke on the string above. Variation 2. The difference in variation 2 is that you use your index finger to fret both the E string and the B string. Make sure that you can hear only the notes that you're fretting. To do this, you need to develop this movement of the finger. You need to practice this. You need the separation of the notes so you can hear all notes clearly. Otherwise, you would hear this. That's not what we want. We want note separation. The second pattern has the notes of the triad again, but played in 3 strings instead of 2. So it starts with a downstroke on the E string, followed by an upstroke sweep on strings B and G, and then back up to the E string with a downstroke. As before, it comes with fingering variations. Let's check them out. Variation 1. Variation 2. Variation 3. You could also play variation 3 with your index finger. Variation 4. At number 8, we've got the solo for Sultans of Swing by Dire Straits, released in the Dire Straits album in 1978. The solo is played by Mark Knopfler in standard tuning. Here it is. Practice tip. The solo is straightforward technique-wise. I can only single out that it is played with fingers. So make sure you dial in a nice clean tone. If you have a Stratocaster or any other super strat guitar with coil split, choose the second pickup position, because that's the one Mark Knopfler uses to play the solo, and use your fingers to play the solo. The second pickup position that I'm referring to is the one next to the bridge pickup position. So the first position uses the bridge pickup, and then the one next to it uses the bridge and the middle pickup. You will notice that you don't need much more than that to sound very similar to the solo. Good luck. Moving on, at number 7, we've got the solo for Highway Star by Deep Purple, released in the Highway Star album in 1972 and played by Ritchie Blackmore in standard tuning. Practice tip. I am going to focus on the second part of the solo where the alternate picking occurs. This is a straightforward alternate picking because it mostly happens on one string, so there is no alternate picking while jumping from string to string. Let's break this down into two exercises. The first one will focus on the picking hand, and the second one will focus on the synchronization between the picking hand and the fretting hand. First exercise. Start slow by alternate picking 16th notes on the high E string without pressing any frets. Just rest your fretting hand on the strings so you can hear only the dead notes. I suggest you use a metronome, which will force your picking hand to follow a specific tempo and not deviate from it, making it easier to not be spot on. Work your way up to the song's tempo and make sure that all the dead notes come out evenly and clearly and you're not deviating from the tempo. Before you jump into it, a key to the effectiveness of this exercise is to find a comfortable way for you to hold the pick and position your hand on the bridge that allows you to alternate pick while keeping your working muscles relaxed. This will make it easier for you to go for longer periods before feeling that you put strain on your muscles and tendons and start feeling tired and losing stability. It will play a key role in the endurance that you will need, especially for long runs like this one, because the alternate picking in this solo goes on for close to 30 seconds, which is a lot if you don't find a comfortable way of doing it. Even though for this solo the alternate picking happens in the two higher strings, I strongly recommend that you repeat the exercise for the rest of the strings. You will notice that you will need slight adjustments in the way you hold the pick and position your hand on the bridge when alternate picking from one string to another. So try and find a way to make it comfortable for all the strings. Attention! If you are a guitarist that plays guitar standing up at gigs or wherever else, this following tip is very important for you, and this stands for all guitar technique practice. You need to keep in mind that when you're standing up, your technique might be different from when you're sitting down, depending on how low you place the guitar when you're standing up. If you want the same technique for both when sitting down and standing up, you should sit down with the guitar, anchor the guitar to your body, then stand up and see at which height the guitar should be when standing up. When you start deviating from that height and the guitar gets lower, you will notice that the angle that the arm meets the guitar and consequently the angle that the pick meets the strings also changes, which forces you to adjust the way you hold the pick and place your hand on the bridge or the guitar. Similarly to how everything changes when going from a standard or a tremolo bridge guitar to a tune-o-matic style bridge guitar. To counter this, I find that you have to spend a fair amount of time practicing standing up and develop both techniques. They might not be totally different to each other, but still not the same. Also, this might not be an issue for you if what you play standing up is not very demanding. For example, if you're playing chords or slow arpeggios or even easy solos. But once you get into that precision mode, the details will start showing. This exercise will go a long way. It will not only help you alternate pick solos on the higher strings, but also riffs on the low and middle strings. Alternate picking is a fundamental picking technique that you will always come across. The second exercise is aiming to synchronize the fretting hand with the picking hand. So again, start slow and this time introduce the notes, making sure that they all come out clearly. I will play the alternate picking part of the solo on 3 different tempos. One being slow at 100 BPM, then a mid-tempo at 135 BPM, and then the actual tempo of the solo, 173 BPM. Grab a guitar and let's try this together. At number 6, we've got the closing solo for Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd. It is released in the Wall album in 1979 and played by David Gilmour in standard tuning. Here it is. Practice tip. Let's focus on the two variations of the blues pentatonic run. The first variation repeats 2 times and the second only once. So let's talk about the first 3 notes. The first note should be an upstroke, and then the second and the third should be a mini downstroke sweep. This leads us to the next note, which is the pull-off from the 10th to the 7th of the B string with an upstroke. And then the next note on the 9th on the G string should be with an upstroke as well. So the next mini phrase on the run is the, which starts with a downstroke and then with an upstroke on the 9th of the D string. It's a legato thing in the beginning, so it's a downstroke with a full bend return and then a pull off to the 7th of the G string and then an upstroke to the 9th of the D string. So far we have. From there, you will return with a downstroke to the 9th fret of the G string and then play the 7th fret of the G string with a mini bend, and after that you will play the 9th of the D string. So the 9th of the D string is an upstroke again. So the last part from this one starts from the 7th of the D string with a downstroke, and then it does the blues pattern until it ends up to the root note, to the 7th of the E string. So it's 7th on the D with a downstroke, then alternate pick 9, 8, 7 on the A, and then slide to the 5th. And then the last 2 notes is the 7th on the E string and the 5th on the A string. You can, I play those upstroke, downstroke, but you can pick them however you want. So all together. And slower. second variation, the first bar is exactly the same except one note, the sixth note. So the first 5 notes are the same. And then when you get to the sixth note, the 9th fret on the G string, you bend it straight away. So basically it's the same, it just bends the 9th fret on the G string a bit earlier. Instead of going. The second bar of the second variation adds a few more notes to the pentatonic blues run before it ends up to the root note. The way I pick it is downstroke on the 7th of the G string, upstroke, downstroke, upstroke with a pull-off, then upstroke again on the 9th of the A, downstroke, upstroke, slide to the 5th, and then upstroke again to the root note. Hey, you! Hi. So, I noticed in my YouTube analytics that 95% of my viewers are non-subscribers, which is crazy. So if you like what you see, just please consider subscribing to the channel because it helps me grow the channel and it helps you, I guess, find my content more easily. So it's a win-win. Thank you. At number 5, we've got the solo for Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, released in A Night at the Opera album in 1975 and played by Brian May in standard tuning.
Sometimes wish I'd never been born at all.
The guitar sound I used for this solo comes from the Matteo Stassato archetype from Neural DSP. I uploaded the preset in the description below, so download it for free. You need to have a license of the Matteo Stassato archetype for the preset to work. Practice tip. This is more of a thing to consider when playing this solo instead of a practice tip. Brian May does this very characteristic thing where he plays the notes but they're slightly off-grid, mostly laid back, thus creating this very unique touch to his solos, and also makes it a pain in the ass to replicate and find the correct note values to put down into scores. This solo is no exception. You can hear it almost throughout it. So let me try and replicate this solo as much as I can, but this time only with the metronome, so you can hear clearly where the notes are a bit off-grid. At number 4, we've got the Freebird solo by Lynyrd Skynyrd, released in the Pronounced album in 1973 and played by Alan Collins in standard tuning. Yes, take! Practice tip. Let's work on a few picking patterns that appear in the solo in several instances, and they cover a big chunk of it. These patterns are very similar to each other, and they are all variations of pull-offs and bends. These are the patterns in the order they appear in the solo. The first one is maybe the most played guitar pattern in the history of pentatonics. Here it is slow. There are two ways to pick this. I just demonstrated the most efficient one, which incorporates a bit of economy picking. You start with an upstroke pull-off on the 18th to the 15th of the B string, and then the next two notes, the 17th full bend on the G string and the 15th on the B string, you do with a single sweep downstroke. And this places your pick right under the B string, so you can start the pattern all over again with an upstroke on the 18th. So, starting off with an upstroke. The second way is to start again with an upstroke pull-off from the 18th to the 15th of the B string. But instead of sweeping from the G to B string for the next two notes, you go with an upstroke again on the 17th of the G string, and then a downstroke on the 15th on the B string, which gets you to the same position again to start all over the pattern with an upstroke on the 18th on the B string. I'm going to cycle through both patterns so you can see the difference in the movement of the picking hand, starting with pattern 1. You can clearly see that because of the economy picking, pattern 1 involves less picking hand movement than pattern 2. The second pattern starts with a full downstroke bend on the 17th of the G string, followed by two upstroke pull-offs from the 17th to the 15th of the G string and D string, before returning to your first note again. You can pick this whichever way you see fit, because all picking combinations will have the same economy of movement in the end of the day. Just keep in mind to find the combination that suits you best when bringing this up to speed. Here is the third pattern. I just demonstrated my preferred way of picking this, which is starting with an upstroke on the 10th of the G string, followed by a downstroke on the 8th of the B string, and then a pull-off upstroke from the 11th to the 8th of the B string, and then a downstroke pull-off from the 10th to the 8th of the B string, and then returning on the upstroke on the 10th again to restart the pattern. The second way to pick this is to start with a downstroke sweep from the 10th of the G to the 8th of the B, followed by two upstroke pull-offs from the 11th to the 8th, and then from the 10th to the 8th, before returning to your first note. Use the combination that suits you best. The fourth pattern is exactly the same as the first pattern, with the only difference that the second note is played on the 15th of the E string instead of the B string. So here is the first pattern, and here's the fourth pattern. Keep in mind that you will not be able to use the first way of picking this, because there is a string skip where the sweep was. So follow the second way of picking this, which is upstroke, downstroke, upstroke pull off, and then upstroke again to restart the pattern. The fifth pattern starts with a downstroke pull off from the 18th to the 15th of the E string, followed by an upstroke on the 15th of the B string, and then start all over again. At number 3, we've got the solo for Hotel California by the Eagles, released in 1976 in the Hotel California album and played by Don Felder and Joe Walsh in standard tuning. Practice tip. I have 2 tips in mind that I already covered before on Highway to Hell and on Burn. Remember when I said on Highway to Hell that this is one of those solos that you could say the tone is in the fingers and that all the nuances make it sound so dynamic? Well, the Hotel California solo with all the beautiful phrasing is another great example. So pay attention to all the nuances like hammer-ons, pull-offs, dead notes, palm mutes, slides, vibratos, bendings and their profiles, and anything else, because these make a huge difference to how the solo sounds. The second practice tip is for the last part of the solo where the harmony is, and it is identical to the practice tip I gave on the Burn solo. So you can go back to the Burn solo and check out the 2 picking patterns I gave and apply them to the new fret numbers of this solo. At number 2, we've got the solo for Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin, released in the Led Zeppelin 4 album in 1971 and played by Jimmy Page in standard tuning. Practice tip. Let's break down the repeated pattern on bars 9 and 10. So you start with a downstroke on the 13th of the B string, then you upstroke on the 15th, and then you bend, and then you release, and then you pull off on the 13th. That's only with one upstroke. So it's down, up, and then upstroke again on the 14th of the G string, and then repeat the pattern. You probably need to spend some time on the upstroke. Just isolate that move and repeat it. Eruption by Van Halen. The solo is released in the Van Halen album in 1978 and is played by the man himself, Eddie Van Halen. The tuning is a half step down. Practice tip. Let's focus on the tapping part of the solo, which consists of the same tapping pattern throughout. And this is the tap, pull off, hammer on triplet. So this repeats itself. Start slow and work with the metronome, and make sure that you're keeping the durations of the notes triplets and you're not shuffling them, and that they are all coming out clearly. Let's practice together 3 different tempos, a slow, a mid, and then the actual tempo of Eruption. I am tapping on the 9th, pulling off on the 2nd, and then hammering on the 5th of the B string. Let's start slow at 70 BPM. Okay, now let's try the mid tempo at 110 BPM. Now let's try something similar to the tempo of the song. Let's try 145 BPM. Thank you for watching. Likes, comments, and subscriptions are much appreciated because they help the YouTube algorithm in a good way and help me grow my channel. Also, If you like this video, make sure you check my other top videos, all included in the playlist on the top right corner. Thanks again, my name is HarryDime, and you will see me in the next video.